So far, we've only looked at functions that can take a specific number of arguments. However, sometimes we'll find that when we write our function, we won't know how many arguments the function is going to be passed when it's called later on in the script. Perhaps the function is going to be called several times, and the first time it's going to be called with 3 arguments, the second time with 10 arguments, and the third time with no arguments at all. We'd need a flexible function that can handle a variable number of arguments. Let's take as an example a simple function that is going to list some ingredients. And let's say we assume that our food product, whatever it is going to have only 3 ingredients. We can simply list them like this, and so long as there are only 3 ingredients in our recipe, then we shouldn't have a problem. Let's say we call the ingredients function with 3 arguments: flour, eggs, and sugar. Now, if we go over to our browser and refresh, we'll see that it handled it fine with 3 ingredients. However, if we add an extra ingredient, then we're going to have problems in that the function won't be able to pick it up. And if we take away 2 of those ingredients to leave 2 arguments when we call our function, as we can see, even worse, we get this very ugly error popping up, missing argument 3 for ingredients. Now that is a bit of a problem, as we can see. So any calls made to this function without the full 3 arguments that we've specified here are going to throw up an error. Any calls made to the function with more than those 3 arguments, the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th and so on arguments are all going to be ignored. So we need a way of making this a lot more flexible. Help is at hand as of version 4 of PHP with the inclusion of a certain number of functions to handle variable arguments when functions are called. And these functions are called funcnumargs, funcgetarg, and funcgetargs. And here's where it gets a little confusing. These functions can only be called from within another function. Otherwise they themselves will throw up some kind of error. Now, what each of these functions does: the first one returns the number of functions in this function, in the function from which it was called. This function will return a specific argument, the value of a specific argument, and you have to specify that as the argument to the arg function. This function will return an array containing all the functions in the parent function. Right, let's see how we implement those, and hopefully this will begin to make sense. We'll just use a simple for loop to loop through the arguments, and we can use, this is where we use typically the funcnumargs function, and then we can use funcGetArg function, along with the number of the loop as the number of the argument that we wish to call. Better put in a line break after that as well. Let's save that and take a look in our browser. As we can see, ingredient O is flour, ingredient number 1 is eggs. We're still getting this error message simply because I forgot to take out these here. Now, when we define a function with a variable number of arguments, we can just leave these brackets, which normally contain the arguments of the function, completely empty. We just open them and close them again. That way, when we come to run our function, it will only be accessing the functions such as funcNumArgs in order to get at the arguments, rather than trying to access the arguments directly through here. So let's try this out with and I have no idea what this would taste like in these proportions. Well, let's take a look to see if our function is working. As we can see, it can handle as many ingredients as we throw at it. You may not need to use functions that contain a variable number of arguments until you have started using quite complex structures in your scripts. But it's good to be familiar with the territory and to know the kind of things that you can and can't do within PHP even before you start using them yourself. I recommend you have a play around and try to create your own functions with variable number of arguments.